Okay, so like Kristen said, my name is Lindsay Demner. I am a career counselor in the Center for Career and Professional Development. I liaison with civil engineering, environmental engineering, undeclared engineers, BME, and Chemie, but I see all engineering students. So I work with all those groups. I do appointments on career exploration, resume, cover letter, interview prep. Which all of the career counselors do as well. So, just a quick overview of some stats for civil engineering, um, which we have on our website as well. But I wanted to first I'll give some employer examples. So these are just a few of the employers that our 2018 graduates went to. So you have more traditional construction firms like Turner Construction and CDM Smith. And you have New York State Department of Transportation. There are also some other government entities that would definitely with a focus on transportation, like the Vermont Transportation Industry. And then if you went to Applied Research Associates, which focuses more on the research aspect of things. So these are just some examples in addition to the individuals you'll hear speak today. And they'll touch on as well the variety of options you have with a civil engineering degree. And as you can see, some of it does end up overlapping quite a lot with environmental. Um, so then these are opportunities currently listed in Handshake, which is our career management system, which you can always email me about or ask about a question. If you have questions about it, I have my email at the end of this. Um, Again, you could see a variety of opportunities, internships, full-time, bridge design, working, here's consulting, transportation engineering internships. We find, and I've personally made a career change or and looked at career exploration, even just looking at positions can give you an idea of, oh, would I want to do this, or what are the job responsibilities of certain jobs. So these are just a selection that were on Handshake, but there are more as well. And looking through, I think would be a good idea. Um, and then we have salary statistics. So we survey each graduating class, and we're working on updating more recent classes. But from those reporting, this was the average salary for civils, and then that was the range. So the range, you'll see a range sometimes based on, the size of the company and also the location. So based on cost of living. A place in New York City might pay more, but also cost of living is a lot higher. So that's something to take into account. And then BLS.gov, which is another great resource just for researching careers. This was the median pay, and they do that. It's higher than ours. Just that's taken from civil engineers at all levels of their career. So, but again, it's a good thing to look at just to get an idea of that. Um,
Hi,
okay.
Lindsay. Sorry to interrupt again. The gray bot from the WebEx chat was covering the civil and environmental intern, maybe internship, um, a couple of
It,
slides ago.
oh, this one?
I'll wait for those who message me to give us a
This,
thumbs up for it.
let's see, sorry. Oh, for the civil. Okay. Yes, sorry about that. Okay. Thank you for letting me, thank you both
Yeah,
for
no
letting me
worries.
know.
No worries. And just so
Um,
everyone does know, we are gonna send these slides out tomorrow. So you'll get a copy of the slides. So whatever you don't see, don't worry. You'll get all the info.
yeah, but yes, thank you. But I appreciate that because I think sometimes if I have the chat box open, I'm also going to give you my email at the end of this, so feel free to email me as well. Right, so I went through that. This is so right, like I said, not all that we do mock interviews, self-assessment, negotiation, salary negotiation. We are mostly virtual this semester, unless people have certain needs, but we're making appointments through Handshake. We can discuss any of this through WebEx. Um, and then there's just some question. If you have questions, like I said, that's my email. Um, I can always help you answer or even direct you to, someone else in my office who might have the answer. And Handshake is our new career management system, and that's where we make appointments. If you go to our CCPD RPI website, you'll see right on the homepage a link to register for Handshake there. But again, email me if you have questions about that. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you or all of you in the future. So thank you. And my apologies for the technical glitches.
Awesome. No worries, Lindsay. So we'll take to see if anyone has questions for Lindsay.
Okay.
And like Lindsay said, she's providing her email, so it's really great if you want to kind of get through the program and see if there are any more specific questions that she could definitely help you out on.
Yes, if you think of questions after, like I said, feel free to email.
It looks like we have one question for you, Lindsay, which is for the internships, how do they work? Which is a big question, so.
Yes, it's so it might be so typically, yeah, I'll go over, I'm not sure what you mean exactly, but typically for internships, so for Arch, they might be available well, this year it's mostly spring. Oh, do you need to complete any specific grade requirements? Thanks for clarifying. Not on our end. For some employers might have a GPA requirement, like a 3.0. We tend to see the higher GPA requirements in Chemi and Aero. Um, so not as much with civil or mechanical engineering. There will always be employers who require, yeah, you always find some who want that 3.0 or 3.3 or whatever. But otherwise, from our end, there isn't a specific grade requirement. I know to go on co-op, which is a 6 to 8 month experience, you have to have a 2.0 or above at RPI. But otherwise, it's just, most places will have you submit a resume and cover letter. Sometimes they'll ask for a transcript, but that's rare in the initial application process. Um, yeah, and sometimes there will be other random application requirements, and I've helped students with that as well. If there's a questionnaire they're not sure of, things like that. It's a good question. Did that help? Do you have any other clarifications with that, or this is a good one. So we okay. Yeah, so good questions. Okay, housing is um not it depends on the company. So some do pay for housing. And, long term, the CCPD would love to have a fund to help with that. At the moment, we don't. So that's something, yeah, there will be some that do it. A lot don't, because it's hard, but some might give you some relocation expenses, even for, an internship. Definitely for full time, you will get relocation or signing bonus. But that's a good question too. We can help connect you with housing services. But yeah, I know it's a tough thing. And then remote options, yes. So if you go on Handshake, and we don't have time at the moment, but like I said, you can definitely, if you want to email me to set up an appointment, I could just show you Handshake for sure. So a lot of the internships right there that are there now list they have remote options. So that's definitely something that's available as well. We definitely have seen that more readily available with internships like computer science, in that field, but there have been some with engineering as well. Good questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think we'll leave
Thank,
it there for today. And I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us a little more about Civil.
thank you. It was great to be here. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all of you hopefully soon. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Okay, so the next thing on our list is we're gonna start the panel. So I'm gonna hand the reins over to my teammate, my colleague, Karen Lewis, my friend. And like I said in the chat, if you guys have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm gonna keep everything organized so we can get to them at the end. And even if you realize you have more questions about internships, or co-ops or that kind of stuff or CCBD, you can throw them in the chat. You can email Lindsay directly. But we definitely want to make sure that you get all those questions answered. So I'm going to pass it over to Karen Lewis, who is the advisor to civil engineering. She's going to help our panelists introduce themselves. And that's it for me right now.
Thanks, Kristen. Hi, everyone. As Kristen mentioned, my name is Karen Lewis, and I am the advisor for civil, environmental, and mechanical engineers in the School of Engineering Hub. At the end of this presentation, if you're thinking civil might be the major for you, you're more than welcome to set up an appointment with me. You can email me. I'll make sure I put my email on the chat, or you can make an appointment directly with me by accessing the School of Engineering Hub website. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. I have three people. Thank you, everybody. Mary, Gary, and Alyssa, if you can speak up or turn your cameras on. For organizational purposes, I'm going to begin with Mary on each of the questions. Then we're going to move to Gary and Alyssa, just so we can kind of keep some order with this. So, Mary, if you don't mind, maybe you can introduce yourself to the group with your name, where you work, where you're from and live now, and the degree and where you went to school.
Hi, everybody. I know this is probably as strange for you all as it is for me, but I'm glad to be doing it. So my name is Mary Voto. I work at a civil and environmental engineering consulting company called Haley and Aldrich out of Boston. I'm originally from a suburb of Boston, and I stuck around because I just love it so much. And I went to RPI studying civil engineering through the co-terminal program. So I got my undergraduate degree in 2017 and my master's of engineering in 2018. And I focus in geotechnical engineering.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. And Gary, wherever you are, name where you work, where you're from, and the degree and when you went to school.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'm getting the message, video is disabled for this, but can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can hear you.
All right, that's probably
nice to hear you, Gary.
all right. Okay, I am Gary Nelson. I am retired, but what you'll be more interested in is that I had a 40-year career in system engineering, and primarily in transportation systems, and probably more on the engineering research side of that. I came from Connecticut originally. I arrived in Troy brand new in 1966. Left there in 1984 to spend 27 years in the DC area, working in and around the federal government, and retired back to Troy in 2011. I went to RPI for a total of 7.5 years, and basically all but doctorate, not completing my thesis. But getting plenty of education in the meantime. You might also be interested in second generation. My older daughter is the assistant GIO, which is Geographical Information Officer for US DOT. So if you want to know anything on that side, I can tell you a little bit about that too.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. And then last but not least, our student, Alyssa. Can you introduce yourself, where you are currently in your career as a student, where you're from, and what degree you're pursuing?
Hi guys, my name's Alyssa. I'm currently a graduate research assistant and I'm working on a project in the civil department. We're developing a geotechnical engineering educational video game, which is pretty neat. I've had 2 geotechnical internships and I'm from North Jersey, but I currently live off campus in Troy. I did my undergraduate degree here at RPI too, and now I'm continuing the URP I did at the graduate level. So that's pretty exciting.
Excellent, thank you. So now that everybody is familiar with our panelists, we're going to start with the questions. And again, I'm going to begin with Mary. What made you specifically decide to become a civil engineer? I mean, this is the question that everybody is probably contemplating as a first-year student, what major they want to pursue. So give us a
Sure.
little insight into that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for many of you, it may be just past your viewership, but I grew up with a show called The Magic School Bus, and there's an episode in The Magic School Bus where they literally have to build a bridge across a bathtub to get like across an alligator in the bathtub, and it just fascinated me. From that day, I loved the idea of bridges and trusses and all that sort of thing. And as I learned more, in my career as a student in grade school, I realized that's what a civil engineer does, and I found my way to RPI, which has one of the richest civil engineering histories in the world, and kind of just made it my home.
I love that.
Toothpicks and gumdrops. I saw the comment come in. That's absolutely right.
That's awesome. Now, Gary, you had an extensive background. Can you tell us what made your evolution of, I know that you were in systems, what made it come to include civil engineering?
Over the period of my career, I've experienced a lot of changes in the whole job market and the orientation of the various professions. So when I graduated with my bachelor's in 1970, that was about the historic low for engineering hirings. And of course, a big change in the electrical engineering industry. So when I went through, I mean, we were half trained in vacuum tube circuits and half trained in transistor circuits, and not a lot in microelectronics. So it just happened that at the end of my senior year, I got a job with what was then the Rensselaer Research Corporation, and it was on advanced transit projects. And these were demonstration projects for the U.S. Department of Transportation. So that gradually shifted my interest from circuitry to basically urban systems. And one way or another, transportation systems and urban systems have been my interest ever since. So by the time you do that, you're in the realm of civil engineering to a great extent. I learned an awful lot about highway engineering, although that was mostly in litigation against highways. And other aspects of civil engineering. I spent several years working on the intelligent transportation system, primarily at the architecture level and analytic studies level. So again, that's a fairly firm crossover to civil engineering.
Excellent. And Alyssa, what made you decide on your major to be civil engineering, since you're currently a student?
So my story is kind of similar to Mary's. In high school, book for English class called Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, which is like a pretty good book. And a lot of people in my class loved the book. And I was like, yeah, this is super interesting. It's all about. They were like, and a murderer. And I was like, yeah, but you skip those bits and you read about the building, right? And they're like, no, those are the boring parts. That was my first hint. So I was like, oh, should I be an architect? That's kind of interesting. But I realized that I was more interested in like the math and physics behind realizing what the architect wants, and like making it work, and like not actually designing the building in the artistic sense. And then I came to RPI declared as a civil engineer, but I didn't really know what concentration I wanted to do. I had a maybe transportation, maybe structures, I didn't know. And then I took a geotechnical engineering course and I was like, oh boy, sign me up for this. And everything started to click, like all of the gen ed classes, like IEA and strength of materials, with like through the lens of geotechnical engineering, were just like so much more interesting. And, you know, I haven't looked back.
That's awesome. And we're going to talk about the classes a little bit later that, you know, right now there's a lot of students in IEA. So hone in on that. We'll discuss it in a bit. So going back to Mary, Can you give us a little bit of insight on the day-to-day function of your job and the industry that you're dealing with in general?
Sure. So within civil engineering, I specialize, like I said, in geotechnical engineering, much for the same reasons as Alyssa. And at my company, as a consulting firm, our job is to work directly with clients, developers, whether it be a hospital, a school, and be part of their design team. We go all the way from the beginning where we do boring explorations to see what kind of ground surface we're dealing with, environmental testing to see if there's remediation, all the way through to foundation recommendations and designs, and then all the way past that into construction monitoring. So we work very closely with owners and we are their representatives and their engineers. So in consulting, we kind of get to touch a little bit of everything from the ground up.
Great, thank you. And Gary, your extensive work history, I think maybe focusing on when you were actually doing transportation work, can you give us an overview of what that was like day to day?
Yes, well, of course, there are many aspects, as there are many modes of transportation, and probably most of my work was in air traffic control, as it turned out. So I started with the surface transportation, particularly advanced transit systems. And then I was doing various consulting, including a rail benefit cost study in the later 1970s. And it was that combination of transportation systems and yet knowing the technical aspect of systems that got me into the MITRE Corporation in 1984 after I was back at RPI in the PhD program. They were involved in air traffic control, or the federally funded Research and Development Center for the Federal Aviation Administration. And I can explain more about the FFRDC institution if you want later. But that got me into a benefit cost analysis for what was then going to be a renovation of the air traffic control system. So it was a combination really of systems, transportation, and economic analysis that got me slotted into that position. I spent 11 years at MITRE working on some other things, including chemical demilitarization, if anybody wants to know about that. And then after that, I left for a brief stint in the Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, where I was a strategic planner for their transit system, getting me back into surface transportation. And that in turn was a link back to the intelligent transportation system that I came back to DC for, originally at MITRE, but then they spun it off into another entity called MITRE Tech. And again, that's another story. But there I spent until about 2002 working on intelligent transportation systems issues. And these are mainly strategic studies, analyses, and working on the architecture for the system for the Federal Highway Administration. After that, I went back and do various contracting work in air traffic management. And there are various aspects of air traffic management, not just the direct control of flights, which is ATC proper. And then finally, or no, I should say in the interim, then I got a job with the Homeland Security Institute. So that ended me up working on risk management issues at a strategic level for DHS, including to some extent transportation systems. Probably the biggest piece of that work was actually working on an architecture for maritime security. So that involved the maritime mode even. And then finally, I went back and worked directly for the Federal Aviation Administration, directly for the federal government. I was in the Terminal Automation Division. And if you go to the Albany Airport today and see the radar spinning around up on a hilltop and see the air traffic control tower where the controllers are, the automation system that connects the radar to the air traffic controllers is the system I was in the program office for, now known as the Standard Terminal Automation Replacement System, or STARS. So that was a crossover between radar data processing, computers, and the operational function of controlling air traffic. So that is pretty much the system level I was operating in transportation systems.
Awesome. I don't even know what else to say. That's amazing. Thank you. And as far as Alyssa's concerned, I know that you mentioned you had a couple of internship opportunities during your undergrad career. So can you tell us about one of your opportunities and what your day-to-day looked like as an intern?
Yeah, of course. So I worked for Langen Engineering this past summer and the summer before, but this past summer was a little bit slower due to everything moving online. But day to day, I mostly did desk study work and then subsurface investigations. So basically looking at geologic maps and past subsurface investigations to understand what we needed to do for the next ones and then actually carrying them out, which is super fun. So what that means is looking at a lot of stuff about what we know about the dirt that's here and then going out and digging in it and seeing, oh yeah, that's about right. So it was pretty cool because at Langen turned to level staff just like within their first couple of years, which is pretty cool for experience. So I actually got to supervise a site investigation. So I went out there and marked all the investigation locations. I was alone out there, interacting with the site owner and managing the subsurface investigation. So the test pits and the borings were all done by me. And then I had to go in to the computer and type them all up in GINT, and that was fun too. But basically, it was just looking at dirt all the time and having a blast outside in the field.
Thank you. Now, the next part, as Alyssa's just previously experienced, and Mary not as long ago, the students that are pursuing a civil engineer major are required to pursue concentration in one of the following subjects, and it's transportation engineering, structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, and environmental. And that decision is usually made in the spring semester of sophomore year after they complete the introduction courses. Now, I think most of us can tell just by listening to all of you, but if you don't mind elaborating on how would you classify the type of work you do as a civil engineer or an intern? And we'll begin with Mary and hit Gary up after that.
Yeah, so as I've said, I am a geotechnical engineer. But one of the cool things I did while at school was through doing a master's of engineering, I got to take a lot of additional course loads. So I got a strong background in structural and environmental engineering, and that really played a part as a candidate when I was applying for jobs. So although I work as a geotechnical engineer, and that's really the core of what I love, elements of concrete and steel, as well as remediation and site practices, come into my day-to-day work as well.
Thanks, Mary. And Gary, I know you didn't have a civil undergrad degree, but what would you classify your work as we've heard?
It's clearly a crossover between the transportation engineering at the systems level, and I would say environmental is virtually inseparable from that. And in particular, a lot of environmental analysis that I got involved in my litigation career, which was kind of anti-project in this region mostly. But those systems, speaking of transportation particularly, and environmental in terms of general impacts, and not leaving out the economic aspects of that to the extent it can be analyzed in benefit cost analysis. So I would say those that's a triangle of my experience.
Thanks, Gary. And for you, Alyssa?
I primarily work geotechnical work, but I have had like overlaps with environmental, and I'm taking structural courses now too. Like Mary said, it's great. We're probably going to touch on this later, but it's really great to get a master's because you just have like so many more courses that you can take and just like get the breadth of your knowledge so that you can do more projects in the field. And I would say for the most part it's been geotechnical, but definitely if they need someone to do environmental sampling, like they can ask anyone to do that. So it's a mix of everything.
Awesome. Okay, so as most of you know, the past 2 weeks, all of our first year students have been quarantining. So I think going stir crazy to say the least. And the topic of clubs and extracurricular activities has come up in many of my emails. So I wanted to know what your undergraduate experience looks like, and this question applies to all of you since you're no longer undergrad. Did you do internships, obviously, join professional groups, and any other extracurriculars, major specific curriculars, even non-major? We'll begin with Mary.
Sure. So I definitely got involved at my time at RPI. So I did during my undergraduate career, I had 3 internships, all in various corners of the country, as well as civil engineering. And then for getting involved on campus, I was really involved in student life. So I was an RA for a year, I was an RD for 2 years, I was in NRHH, Phalanx, Resident Student Association, professional leadership program, other stuff. This feels like a lifetime ago. But I loved getting involved on campus because it made me feel important, and it made me feel like somebody's going to remember me when I leave. But I also was involved in an undergraduate research program that was very civil specific. I worked in the geotechnical centrifuge. That was super cool. I mean, there's just so many different things depending on what you're really interested in. If you want to be, a public figure on campus, then there's things to do for that. If you want to be, professional and well prepared, there's tons of organizations for that. And if you want to be, very bookish and involved in your major, there's tons of opportunities for that. And I highly recommend getting involved.
Great, thank you. And Gary? Undergrad experiences, extracurriculars?
Yes, I didn't have a official internship via RPI, but what I did is I worked summers back where I came from in Norwalk, Connecticut, at a firm called the PerkinElmer Corporation. It exists only in name now, but what it was at the time was a very important nationally and internationally developer of scientific instruments and some government contract work that stemmed from that. You may have read that they were the grinders of the original Hubble telescope mirror, and there is a facility that carries on that work. But they're perhaps the most significant thing, which is really just of historical interest now, is I worked on one of the first projects to do digital processing of photographic imagery. This was in 1969. And that was about the first they could combine the capability to do fast Fourier transforms with the computer power that they had in those days. So there I was, a junior engineer doing basically digital coding into a mini computer and processing what we later knew, but not then, were the reconnaissance photographs from our early reconnaissance satellites. So, that was quite an experience for me. It did not lead to anything later for me, but it was a formative experience for me. In terms of the on-campus activities, I was at the time a student member of the IEEE for the electrical engineers. I ran 4 years in track and cross country here. I was also a ham radio operator at that time and was somewhat involved in the ham radio club and continued to do that, as a matter of fact. I would just say that any student should have extracurricular activities. There's a lot of stress in the academic work we do, and anything that can help relieve that, as well as getting you into familiarity with other career path skills, is a very good thing to do and well worth taking the time for.
Awesome, thank you. And Alyssa, what have you been up to while on campus?
So I'm pretty much doing the same things now. I've definitely moved to some of the broader clubs that I've been in as I've honed my interest into dirt. But I've been on the track and field team here, so that's fun. And I used to be part of Engineers Without Borders my freshman sophomore year, but then that just became too much because the meetings are right after track practice, like right after. So I switched to the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is like later meetings. So that was fun. But I've been mostly involved with a couple of civil URPs, which is the undergraduate research projects. And that's how I got into the work that I'm doing as a master's student. And they're great experiences, but also great ways to get involved with your professors because the civil professors are like super great. And working with them directly, really, you get to see that, which is really cool. And last year we reinstated the GeoWall team here, which I don't know if you guys have heard of Concrete Canoe, but it's basically the geotechnical version of that. So you build a little mini retaining wall out of paper and then compete against other schools, which is pretty cool. And we did pretty well at the competition this year. Or I guess, well, no, it was 2020, right before everything shut down. But that was really cool because right after that, this is a side note, but right after that, my DOL partner and I flew directly to our track indoor championship meet. So it was like conference meet. So that was fun. And right now I'm also secretary of the Chi Epsilon Civil Engineering Honor Society. So besides internships and stuff, I pretty much do civil engineering societies and research and track.
Awesome. So the bottom line for that, for all three of you, was you're highly involved on campus and not just with your academics. It's to manage your time and diversify yourself in all the activities that you do. And that is something that we preach in the hub. So we could talk about that in details as well. Moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about the classes and not just specifically the courses that civil engineers take. Based off your experience, so many students ask us what to do with the free electives and your humanities and what to direct those towards. So if you could give us some ideas, whether it be economics or programming or management, something that you think would strengthen the marketability of a civil engineer, I would love to hear about that. We'll begin with Mary again.
Sure. So it's actually something that Professor Letchford had said to me as I was navigating the decisions of what kind of classes I want to take. And he said, well, you're here to become an engineer, so why don't you take engineering classes? I was like, oh, that sounds smart. Okay. So I tried to fill as many electives as I could with engineering classes. And like I said, I took classes that weren't geotech specific. I tried to get a breath in all civil engineering as well. I took computer science and things like that were super helpful. I think that you need to find a balance between classes that you're going to enjoy and are going to help you get through the day. One of my favorite classes I took in all of RPI was sports psychology because I'm an avid sports fan and I love psychology, and it was just such a great fit. But at the same time, you really do want to present yourself as a serious academic when you're going and looking at different jobs. One of the things is if you have to send in your transcript, they'll look. I got a comment once like, oh, wow, you're not taking your senior year easy. That's good. Because a lot of people fall into that scape of, oh, I'll save, some of my fluff classes for the end. But companies do notice that. So kind of keep that in mind. You do want to have that balance of classes that you enjoy and keep you sane, but you also do want to challenge yourself and prove that you're a serious student and that this is important to you as well.
Excellent. And for you, Gary, any courses? I know you mentioned economics at one point. Anything that highlights, foundations in your career?
Yeah, and I want to echo Mary's comment on expanding your curricular horizons, particularly in later years. I probably did that. I remember in my senior year, I ended up with 6 finals over 5 days, branching into some other things well outside the EE field. but I do have a bias. I went through the systems curriculum in EE, and I would highly recommend taking the course in systems, which in my day was the linear systems dealing with control and communication systems. I have no idea what exists now in that field, but the basic paradigm of feedback systems and networks, I think, is important in any field. And I think everybody should have some knowledge of that perspective on things. So look for a systems engineering course of that kind. Economics, certainly, I think for civil engineers in particular, there has to be an understanding of the economics, both at the macro level and at the project level of resource allocation. So the basic economics courses, but I think microeconomics was an advanced course in my day. So I would definitely recommend getting into some additional levels of economics. But I think the whole urban systems and environmental systems field is, again, something that's essential to almost anyone now, but particularly in civil engineering. I think people have to recognize you can take civil engineering in the small view of, okay, I'm going to build this structure, and in the larger view of, okay, this structure is part of some larger system. I think you can balance yourself as to what end of that spectrum you're on, but I think if you're at the structural level, you really should have some understanding of the systems, and if you're at the systems level, you really need some understanding at the more detailed level of structures. So in my day, again, there were courses on urban systems of one sort or another, urban planning, zoning, land use cases was a course in my day. And then, of course, there must be many environmental courses now from different perspectives. By all means, learn something about the law and practice of environmental impact statements. I think no civil engineer can get away without knowing that. So even something on the legal side, I think, would be very good in that case.
Thank you. And I think a lot of the sustainability studies in Haas might parallel with some of the urban planning too, I would assume. What do you think on courses that you would recommend, Alyssa?
So I can offer a more like specific to RPI right now perspective. I definitely agree with Mary about taking classes that aren't necessarily related to what you're studying, but I found that if I take classes that I'm interested in, they always find their way back into what I'm doing. Like I took an astronomy course, and then I took geology or geophysics rather. And all the things about the accretion of planets, goes into how the subsurface is set up in the Earth. Crazy how that works out. But I would suggest taking PD3 before you take PD2. This is a huge thing for me. I took PD3 I want to say sophomore year, and I got an internship like right after because of what I learned in that class. They work on your elevator pitch. Great stuff. And then I think we're moving towards like more computer science stuff now. So I would not shy away from taking a 4-credit computer science class for sure. That's really huge these days. As far as Gary was talking about systems planning, if you look in the, I'm looking at it right now, the civil engineering curriculum, you can see the design electives, and we have mass transit systems and transportation system planning, and those are two that some of my friends in geotech are actually taking because of that systems perspective. So that's really important. And I think that there are so many different electives out there that are relevant to each concentration, even like slightly or super relevant. And if you look through the curriculum, the suggested curriculum, you can see a lot of them. But even if you go through the course catalog, that's super helpful too, because a lot of the courses that RPI offers aren't listed on the suggested curriculum because they're like extra and fun. And those are the fun courses that you want to take.
Awesome, thank you. And we can talk about that. Students who are actually planning their 4-year plan of study, if you meet with your advisor in the hub, we could we could discuss that. I mean, you might not know what concentration you want to pursue until you take those intro courses, but we could definitely discuss the possibilities of all of those as well, and the branch offs of those concentrations. So moving forward, we're going to talk about advanced degrees, because so many students are planning for the rest of their lives and know exactly what they want to do. So as far as like master's degrees, PhDs, professional licensing, can you guys all weigh in on that for me and give me your perspective? And we'll begin with Mary again.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I pursued a master's of engineering degree. I found it to be incredibly helpful. It was kind of, and I saw Professor Bennett's on the call. She can attest to this, that I kind of decided it last minute. I didn't think it was something that I wanted to do. And then as I was going around at the job fair hosted at RPI, a lot of people were saying, well, you know, we'd really love it if you had one. We'd really love it if you had one. And RPI, particularly the civil engineering department, is so well adapted to be able to transition you from undergraduate to master's and graduate study. The co-op co-term program is great for what I did, but there are tons of research opportunities within the civil environmental engineering department, depending on what you want to focus on. So for me personally, it was the right decision. The company that I was pursuing, that I was highly interested in, is one of the top consulting firms in Boston. So they really value that master's degree because they're, you know, a higher tier company. Some companies that are newer might not, you know, care as much, or might focus more on the practical experience. But for me and what I was hoping to do, it became absolutely invaluable and set me apart from other candidates going out into the workforce at 22 with a master's degree. Kind of gave me a leg up. So I would definitely recommend it, as well as professional licensing. I didn't notice personally a great push for professional licensing while I was in school. But as soon as I stepped out into industry, it was the number one focus for so many people, because to get to the highest levels in, you know, a non-academic engineering career, your PE really is super important. And that starts with your engineering and training license, which is an exam you can take your senior year of college. Even if it doesn't end up being what you do forever, getting that process rolling always gives you that option. And it's so much harder to try and do it retroactively, that if it's something anybody even suggests and you can do it, I highly recommend pursuing your licensing.
Excellent. And for you, Gary, can you weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, my academic career got me also to a master's in engineering. And by that time, I was already branching out from strict electrical engineering and getting more onto the transportation and urban side. My experience is that a master's is probably a minimal requirement for most professionals these days. Going on to PhD work, I did that for 2.5 years, the coursework and some initial thesis work. And in the kind of practice I got into, which again was mostly the research engineering side of things, a PhD would have been desirable. But I think as it turned out, the additional coursework and plus my experience over the years was sufficient to get me into some fairly high level and advanced programs. But, you know, if you want to be more on the research side and work for the big consulting firms in other than just strict structural engineering, then a PhD, I think, is the direction you need to go in. In terms of the PE licensure, my career was so varied, I really never got into any one field long enough to have the practice where a PE would have been useful. But I think for a lot of people, and again, if they're in the structural side of things, it's pretty much mandatory. If you want to rise up in the management and be able to be in charge of projects and put your name on that project, then the PE is definitely what you want to do. And it does require some practical experience under some tutelage. So it really requires working in a consistent field for a while also. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you. And Alyssa, where are you in your process and what do you feel about advanced degrees?
So I definitely am glad I'm getting a master's degree because of all the coursework that you get the opportunity to have access to. But I do want to, because I think Mary and Gary addressed it pretty well. I do want to answer Miriam's question about like how likely it is to find a good job with a civil engineering degree as soon as you graduate without grad school. And I definitely think that you absolutely can get a good job with a bachelor's degree in engineering. A lot of my friends have done it. I've been offered positions. So it's not mandatory to get a master's degree. And a lot of companies will do training for you. Like the company that I worked for was super big on the job training and gave a lot of like professional development hour, lunch and learns, things like that. And then some companies will even pay for your master's after the fact if you want to go back to school. And then something else that I've noticed is the people that I talk to who have a PhD who work in the design field often find that their knowledge is somewhat too niche to apply to their everyday job. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. And I think that they definitely appreciate having the experience of a PhD and that knowledge. But I don't think it's necessarily like necessary to get a PhD. So those are my thoughts on that.
That's awesome. And one of the things that we talk about in the hub is to plan for the future, but also plan to have your plans change, you know, like there's always the possibility that as a first year student, you would plan to do the co-term program, which is the 5 years master's. But if you do end up with an internship that leads to your dream job, by all means take it, because that's the way life is, you know, so that's great. Thank you all. Moving forward, we had just additional advice for students that are planning to be a civil engineer. I gave my 2 cents on being open-minded. Mary, if you want to begin with yours, that'd be awesome.
I would like to say about civil engineering that it's probably one of the most versatile type jobs that you can pursue, degrees that you can pursue. There's so many different avenues. There's a very broad civil engineering if you want to go into like general contracting and construction management. There's more niche civil engineering if you want to go into, you know, deep foundations specifically, or tunneling, or highway transit. You can do so many different things with your degree, and I think it kind of circles back to the idea of an undergraduate degree versus a graduate degree. As an undergrad, even though you pick a concentration, you're really well trained in a lot of different areas of civil engineering. You take all of your intro courses, you may have had a couple of different internships, and you can really pick at that point whatever type of civil engineering you want to do. Or if you really find your passion in a specific company and in a market that you want to pursue, and then that master's degree, that graduate degree really helps you focus and tailor yourself towards that market. It's great, but as a civil engineer, you can do just about anything. I know I had applied for mechanical engineering internships working for aviation companies, and they saw my background in materials and strengths and said, okay, that's what we're looking for. I did interviewed for supply chain internships. So civil engineering really gives you that breadth to be able to pursue many different things and won't pigeonhole you into one particular career path. That's my advice: is keep it open for the future.
Excellent. And for you, Gary, I'm sure you have some advice to give to the students.
Yeah, I would, again, second Mary on her advice. I have the experience over the 40 and now 50 years, and I would say the entire market for engineering changes. And my own case was I spent an awful lot of time studying analog circuit design, both undergraduate and my master's year. And I would say that was probably the least thing I used over my whole career. But one can't tell one wants to pursue what one's interested in. And at the time, I was interested in electronics. And that's always good of its own, but you do have to be aware that what you get into as a career path and what is most valuable from an academic perspective may be quite different. So I can only advise that you look widely, try to figure out what are the really basic paradigms and skills in your field, and then focus on those so that they can be most widely applied. And then maybe in later years, if you figure out, okay, this is what I'm really interested in, yes, you can commit yourself to that, but that's always a risky commitment. I'll just give you some examples of the kind of civil engineering I've run into in my career. The last job, even in the FAA, right next to our office, which was in the automation systems, were the people dealing with air traffic control tower design and contracting. So that was primarily a civil engineering activity, but it had to do with the specifics of control towers, for which a very important requirement is all the automation and communications that they house. So that would be an example where, okay, you're dealing with civil engineering for the structure, but functionally you're dealing with activities that deal with computers, communication, radar, and so forth. So that would be just an example where you might look for adjunctive fields to the civil engineering itself. When I started out with the Rensselaer Research Corporation, we had one of the engineers there was a specialist in vehicle design, particularly railway carriage truck design, which is a big issue for high-speed rail and the stability of rail cars and so forth. So that was an area where the structural issues started to merge over into the mechanics and the vehicular design. And again, I'll use the example of my older daughter who's into the geographical information systems. Once you start putting things on the earth, how they line up in geographical systems is important, and getting into geographical information systems is going to be important both in the studies of where you put things and the studies of how they interconnect ultimately in the functional and urban systems. So geographical information systems might be another piece of advice I could give you. But again, the general lesson is, I would say, as time goes on, you can be less and less certain of what direction your profession is actually going to go into from the perspective of an undergraduate education. So I would say half pursue what you love, and half pursue what is going to be basic to any field.
Thank you, Gary. I think this is all really great advice. And what can you say, Alyssa? What's your perspective?
I definitely think civil engineering is super versatile, and especially with our co-term program, I know a lot of people into like one aspect of civil engineering and then at the master's level taking it to mechanical engineering or something else. So I think that civil engineering really caters to like every math and physics niche that you could be interested in, like geotech and structures, or like rigid and deformable bodies, statics and dynamics. And then like transportation has like a super heavy statistical presence. And then, you know, environmental engineering, chemical, fluid mechanics, and construction focuses on cost benefit. If you go into civil engineering as an undergraduate degree, then you can just go do whatever graduate degree you're more interested in. And I think that if you're really truly undecided about what engineering you want to do, civil engineering is a really great place to start, because like all of the gen ed classes are super relevant to other engineering disciplines. And then you'll slowly find what you're more interested in.
Thanks, Alyssa. And you touched on something that we do bring up too, that all of the engineering courses that you're taking right now as undeclared, or even as a civil engineer, if you're declared already, they're very similar. And that first year is pretty similar. So moving within majors is almost seamless. So that's something that you can always discuss with your Haas or your hub advisor as well. We're going to pause for a few minutes because I want to see if we have any questions for the panelists since we're running short on some time here. Does anybody have any questions?
We had one question earlier in the chat, which Alyssa was very kind to answer to, and Mary and Gary did kind of answer the question without specifically answering the question. So I just want to reiterate it so everyone could hear the question. And this was from one of our students who we've had a few students who've had class, so she wanted to make sure she got her question in. So she said, as I'm currently searching for internships for my semester away, I began to wonder how likely it would be to find a good job with a civil engineering degree in either concentration as soon as we graduate. Would it be rather difficult because we need more training, or would either of you all suggest going straight into graduate school? So I think it would be great if Mary or Gary want to chime in if they have any specific thoughts on that question.
Sure. I think that you can definitely find an excellent job without going to graduate school with a civil engineering background. I think that, you know, having even higher education just gives you that extra leg up. It makes you even more competitive. And if you're looking to go into a specific field, makes you a generally better candidate. But I would say in my office, half of the entry-level staff don't have graduate degrees, and they're, you know, incredibly capable, successful employees of my company as well. So I certainly don't think you need a master's degree. I think you can be very successful without one. But at the same time, if it's something that you're remotely interested in, it can't hurt.
Okay, I'll add to that. First of all, I think every student should consider the continuity of the educational experience. To go the 5th year, particularly for a professional master's degree, I think is almost an optimal choice. To pause after a bachelor's, go to work, try to come back into grad school is a difficult burden. And that was my experience when I came back after let's see, it would be 9 years between my master's and the PhD program. And believe me, that was a very difficult transition. First of all, I carried around card decks when I left, and by the time I got back, we were using shared terminals for a central computer. That took some getting used to. But in terms of getting a job, yeah, I certainly agree that one can get a job with a bachelor's, but I really think the best approach is to get some knowledge of the professional field through internships, go through the 4, 5, and 6 years to get a master's. I think your mind will be better made up and your skills will be more honed for a choice of jobs. So do it either way, but I do recommend going on to a master's as quickly as you can.
Thank you. Did get another question, so I'll read this question directly. Dr. mentioned in the session before this that some students who graduate with civil engineering degrees go on to become entrepreneurs and start their own businesses. Do you agree that some civil engineers can be entrepreneurs?
I can speak that I definitely think that that's you know, a definite possibility, but particularly with civil engineering. If you go into the design world, you know, you may have to work for a larger company to kind of get a reputation, some experience, some bonus knowledge. But I would say quite a large number of people do branch off and form their own design or consulting firms. Oftentimes they're much more boutique. Like there's one company that we work with often, and they do specifically geostructural designs for supportive excavation systems, and they get contracted out by tons of different companies, and so it's one man who just works with him in a very small team, and it's his company. So you can be entrepreneurial in that way. In terms of being innovative, I think, well, you didn't really ask about being innovative, but I put that hand in hand with entrepreneurs. I think civil engineering lends itself to being innovative because you're always having to come up with a new solution. It may be the same problem, but it's always going to be a new solution because you're never going to be building on the exact same ground that you built on before. Every time you do something new, whether it's a building or a bridge, it's going to be a new problem to solve. And some people who get really good at that can make their independent career and become entrepreneurs focusing in those sorts of fields.
Comment on that too. I would say there are perhaps two branches of becoming an entrepreneur. One is you can invent something and make a lot of money off it. And the other is you can just specialize and gain experience in the particular knowledge field and become a consultant in that. One thing I would recommend is if you could read business histories and try to see, okay, what was the path to becoming the kind of corporate success or entrepreneurial success that you're trying to be. And there are all sorts of paths to it. I mean, the history shows a lot of it is chance. But I would say that experience in your work, you will come upon things that might be liable to invention, and you will gain the experience that will lead you in the consulting field. I'll point to one local example here. I worked briefly for what was Roger Creighton Associates over in Del Mar. You may know of them as a fairly reputable consulting firm in the civil engineering field around here, particularly in transportation and highways. You look at what Creighton did. He came out of the Navy, for one thing. He worked on the CATS program, the Chicago Area Transportation Study, which became the classic study of urban regional planning. He was then a director of research for the New York State Department of Public Works. And from that, he formed his own consulting firm that's been quite successful and carries on, I believe now, as Creighton Manning and Associates. So read the histories, look at the different paths, see what you might be interested in, and look for both the invention opportunities and the consulting opportunities.
Creighton Manning is now like a very big local structural company, so that's pretty fun. I would say I don't have a lot of experience like in the workforce, obviously, but like looking for jobs, if you're not looking in like the big cities, you'll find that there's like maybe one big firm that is in the local area, and then a bunch of smaller firms that is one guy with his PE and then his little team, and they consult on smaller projects. So one thing I have to say about that is he has his PE and he can sign the drawings. So that's an interesting thing about getting a professional license. I think that's pretty important if you're your own consultant.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we do have like a 3-minute warning here because I did promise that we would try to wrap promptly at 7, which I'm so shocked that we're here already. So I will say that students who are in this call, please don't be shy with your questions. You know how to reach me. I will put my email in the chat in just a second. I'm not very good at talking and typing at the same time. And you know, if any of our alumni and Alyssa, if you're comfortable sharing your email addresses with the students, you're welcome to throw them in the chat too. No pressure, absolutely no pressure. And then the last thing is, I know that Mary has a 60-second pitch for civil engineering, so I'd love to give her the platform for the final moments of today. And I'll make one more announcement as soon as Mary wraps up. But Mary, if you want to take the floor again.
No pressure. Alyssa only talked about having to do our elevator pitches and practicing those. I want to try and sell you guys on civil engineering specifically as a whole. You know, we talked a lot about our own professional experiences and our experiences at RPI and what made us, you know, pursue this as a career. But one of the things that continually fascinates me is the longevity of a civil engineering career, not only in your lifetime in terms of there's tons of job opportunities. The market doesn't subside as much as it does in other fields because We're always going to be, building new things, looking towards new things, remediating things. But if historical perspective, I can't be gushy enough about civil engineering. I recently took a trip to Europe, and one of the coolest things that could have happened to me was in Venice, one of the most historic cities in the world. They have a whole museum display on the foundation of Venice and the structural and the piles that it's built on and the seawalls and all of these different things. And I just sat there and was like, this is something that the whole world comes and sees, and this is what I do for a living. So it's one of those kinds of careers that it might not be the most glitzy, it might not be the most glamorous. We talk about dirt a lot, we talk about concrete and, whatever, but at the end of the day, it's one of those careers that like actually makes a difference. You can drive through your city and point out to your friends from out of town, hey, I helped build that building. Hey, see that dam? That was me. These highways, let me tell you how all the lights work on them. It's one of those kinds of careers that's so universal. It's somewhat underappreciated, but it's just so fascinating to be a part of, that I hope you guys got a little bit of that from us and look forward to it as well.
That was awesome.
I don't know how I did on the 60-second mark.
I didn't time you, but I think you were really darn close. And you inspired Alyssa a little bit too, and she has a statement that she would like to quickly say as we wrap up.
I definitely, Mary touches on it like perfectly. One thing that I want to add after she said that was that civil engineering, like as you get more experience in the field, you just age like fine wine because you've seen more and more stuff and you can just apply it more and more. And I think that's really great. Not to put in some buzzwords of automation, but like that's really great in this time of automation because you just get more and more experience that like is super, super important. And then I think it's really cool because you get to see what you've worked on. Like driving by things. When I work with contractors, they're always like, oh yeah, like I helped build this highway that you drove on to get here. And they're always sharing stories about like what they've worked on. And if they've worked on the site that you're working on now, like 20 years ago, they'll always tell you everything you need to know. It's great. It's so great. Civil engineering, pretty good.
So in case you guys weren't ready to before today's industry hour, I just want to thank everyone again so much, our panelists for coming to talk to us about civil engineering. Of course, Karen for helping interview the panelists, Lindsay, who was there a little bit earlier with the CCPD. You as students have a really great resource available to you, so I'm so glad that you all took the opportunity to come today. And for those of you who had to leave early and are watching the recording now, props to you for taking that time. As I said, give us all your questions. We'll make sure you get the answers to them. Next week's industry hour is going to be ECSE, and that one's going to be a little bit longer because we have electrical and computer systems merged into one major. So a few more panelists on that one. But for everyone who is in this today, you're going to see an email with a bunch of resources from tonight. And thank you so much for coming.